social dialogue in times of transition. And before I give the word to Commissioner General John Tesleff for welcoming words, I would like to remind you to please use your face mask in accordance of Emirati rules. But let me start with giving the floor to Jan Tesleff for a welcome speech. Welcome on stage, Jan.
I'm not sure that these microphones are compatible with masks, but good morning, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you for attending this very important event, an event that will touch upon sustainability in the broadest sense. Promotion of sustainable, responsible, and inclusive business practices is a key component for building back better according to the 2030 agenda. And it's particularly linked, as we all know, to SDG 8 on decent work and inclusive, sustainable, and sustained economic growth, as well as SDG 17, calling for a strong global multi-stakeholder partnership and cooperation. I think we all know that business plays an important part because for most countries, when it comes to accounting for the GDP, it's private enterprise. And for most countries, when it comes to the majority of jobs, it's private enterprise. It is very important to look at the value chain and to trace sustainability upstream. It is not only the carbon footprint we need to worry about. We certainly need to build back greener, but also better in the broader sense. Welcome this morning to the forest, the Swedish pavilion at Expo 2020. And this building exemplifies exactly what this seminar is about. Sustainability in the broad sense, of course environmental, of course economic, but also societal. I'm delighted that we can unite around these important themes today, and to see how government, private enterprise can, should, and must work together. Behind the wooden walls of our pavilion lies a lot of skill, a lot of hard work, brains and muscles. The materials and methods used in designing, engineering, and building the pavilion are sustainable. And so should the software that goes into this building, into its activities, be the human aspect. What we want to show in this building in the course of the 6 months is to make the invisible sustainability visible to our visitors. This event would not have been possible if we had not had the support of our partners. And I'm very proud, delighted to welcome here today Her Excellency, the Swedish Minister for Trade and for Nordic Affairs. I think we can all join our hands. Minister Anna Hallberg will address you this morning, and we are also delighted to have our international partners with us. and I'm very happy to welcome His Excellency the Ambassador of France, Xavier Châtel, and His Excellency the Ambassador of Belgium, Peter Klaas. Thank you very much. Minister, the floor is yours.
I agree. Okay. Thank you, Jan. Excellencies, representatives from international organizations, high representatives from companies, from trade, distinguished participants, and friends and partners. Change can be frightening. I don't really like to sound pessimistic initially, but it's really true for a lot of people. Globalization, digitalization, automation, migration, integration, climate change, the list goes on. These are challenges we all face today, whether we like it or not. But change doesn't necessarily equal bad. Change can also be an opportunity. We all know that, and we all embrace that in this room, I think. Let me give you an example. A few years ago, a survey by the Pew Research Center found that 72% of Americans were worried about the future in which robots and computers substitute for humans. By contrast, a survey by the European Commission that same year showed that 80% of Swedes expressed positive views about robots and artificial intelligence. The same change, but different ways of looking at it. Unlike digitalization, climate change is de facto a threat to all of us. But even climate change constitutes an opportunity for those who try to find new green solutions. All these changes shape the labor markets of the future, be it through artificial intelligence, outsourcing, increased mobility, or the decline in previously profitable sectors, affected by disruptive innovations or new industries suddenly showing up. So how do we ensure that these changes create opportunities and not threats to our future labor market, to our companies, to our workers, and to our countries and societies? One way is, of course, to include all those affected by the change. Social dialogue, that is. Inclusive forms of communication between employers, workers, governments. It's a simple but yet so efficient way of doing just that. And it's also proven to great defense against wealth gaps, against populism and inequality. This dialogue between the social partners is not only about protecting workers. The promotion of living wages and safe work environments are, of course, important goals of social dialogue. But as Minister of Foreign Trade, I have seen firsthand how companies, by collaborating and discussing with workers' representatives, also have the advantage of long-term resilience. It can lead to increased productivity, to better access to qualified staff, and fewer disruptions to production. And a stable labor market creates the competitive edge for each country that can embrace that. It creates a calm and consensus-based labor market, attracts investments, of course, foreign investments. And this is true both in a Swedish context, within the companies, as well as to the company's supply chains, also worldwide. And equally important, social dialogue foster the development of skills needed for any country to be competitive in a world ever more characterized by change. We actually have an expression for this in Sweden. We call it, "We are protecting people, not jobs." And we focus on what's needed on future labor markets, not on protecting the jobs or companies that belong to the past. And we do this in a dialogue with all affected stakeholders by making sure to upgrade skills and know-how for our workers, companies, as well as our society as a whole. And in all this, I usually say that in the driver's seat of all this is very much the companies themselves. And we as governments must see to that we have the framework and that we facilitate this kind of social dialogue that we all want to see. The Global Deal Initiative is the Swedish government's and Sweden's contribution to social dialogue worldwide. It started with the Swedish Prime Minister as an initiative and the Swedish government, but now it's hosted by the OECD, and we have 130 partners worldwide, and we have very active partners. I see some of them here in the room today. The countries like France, these companies like Scania and so on. It's fantastic to have you with us, and you really make a difference, all our partners. And while launched by Sweden in 2016, it is now a truly multi-stakeholder partnership. And it's also in collaboration with OECD and with ILO. And I must say, I have very hard to understand who can't really support the Global Deal Initiative as its core, or the social dialogue as its core, because it's a win-win-win situation for companies, for workers, and for governments. And we have proven that in many countries that this really works. And the Global Deal Initiative, it constitutes a platform which our partners get the latest research, they share best practice, they learn new ways of carrying out the social dialogue, but also our partners are carrying this message and spread the word around the world how important it is to have the dialogue. Such a basic term, but it's so essential to meeting all these change throughout the world today. Today's event is a step in this process of sharing best practice, sharing know-how, and I'm especially pleased to bring this discussion to Expo 2020 in Dubai. And when I was here roughly 2 years ago, and in inauguration of this building and planted a tree here, you still have the tree here, it's living, and you can see it downstairs, and it was very important for me to also raise this issue, raise this question with the government in this country and have the dialogue also with the government. I always bring up the social dialogue issue, the Global Deal Initiative, when I meet government representatives in countries here in the Gulf region or in anywhere in the world. And I think it's a fantastic platform to start discussing how can we spread the word, governments, companies, and also, of course, union organizations. I hope today's discussion will enable all of you to make the most of the opportunities that will arise from the ongoing global green transition and the social sustainability that Jan talked to initially. I think we all can embrace that this is really an opportunity and not only a threat. And I see it as an opportunity. And I must say, this is one of the most, for me and the Swedish government, one of the most important seminars during this week to talk about this. What kind of societies do we want to see in the future for companies, for workers, and for the whole societies? So thank you so much for being here, and I really look forward to discussions today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister Hallberg. And let me introduce myself. I am Cecilia Ekholm, and I will be your moderator today. I am what is called the Swedish government's ambassador for sustainable business. And it's a position that we've had since 2002. So next year, it's actually 20 years of ambassadors for sustainable business, or CSR ambassadors. And not many countries do have this function. But one of our co-organizers, France, actually has a CSR ambassador as well. And I'm very happy that we're doing this with you and the Belgian embassy here today. And of course, with the support of the OECD and the Global Deal. And with that, I would like to send a video message from Ulrik Knudsen, the Deputy Secretary of the OECD, to this event. Please.
Today's Global Deal event at the Dubai World Exposition takes place at an important time. The OECD's latest OECD Economic Outlook, released last week, finds that the global recovery continues to progress, with global GDP growth at 5.6% this year and 4.5% next year, before settling back to 3.2% in 2023, close to the rates we saw before the pandemic. But the growth momentum is slowing, and disparities in the recovery remain, Labour markets have not fully recovered yet. In OECD countries in September 2021, there were still 5.5 million more people unemployed than there were before the pandemic started. And as the threat of infection remains high, we remain vulnerable. The recent emergence of the new Omicron variant provides us with yet another stark reminder of just that fact. In addition to maintaining efforts to recover from the COVID-19 crisis, countries are called to address long-standing challenges. First among them is climate change. The COP26 conference in Glasgow made it clear that despite some progress on environmental sustainability, there's still a very long way to go to avoid the worst effects of climate change. If the world really wants to keep global warming limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius, much more needs to happen. According to the IEA, today's pledges cover less than 20% of the gap in emissions reductions that need to be closed by 2030 in order to keep a 1.5% path within reach. These are daunting challenges, but we can emerge from the COVID-19 crisis with a stronger and more inclusive labour market that's geared towards social and environmental sustainability. For example, the IEA estimates that up to 2.1 million new energy efficiency jobs could be created per year as part of recovery efforts. Well-designed and well-implemented green stimulus measures can generate income, create jobs, and help make our economies more sustainable. This double agenda of recovery and sustainable transition is an ambitious one. To achieve it, a strong social consensus on the objectives and the pathway to a low-carbon economy will be fundamental. Social dialogue, which is at the core of the global deal, can help. Social dialogue brings social partners and governments together to discuss, consult, or negotiate. Social dialogue also leads to a better understanding of what is at stake, and by forging broad support, it ensures political ownership. Finally, effective social dialogue promotes a fairer sharing of the burden of adjustments by supporting workers and businesses that face the biggest challenges. Let me give you one example of the benefits of social dialogue at Enel, the largest company in the Italian electricity sector. To address the planned closure of 23 traditional and coal-fueled thermos electric power plants by 2025, Enel mobilized existing social dialogue partners to analyze workers' skills and to support their move to other parts of the Enel group on a voluntary basis. Social dialogue is also being used to help shield local communities from the effects of these plant closures. Dialogue with local stakeholders is helping to explore new investment projects that reuse the existing industrial sites, for example by reconverting old thermos gas plants into internal logistical centers of the Enel group. The transition to a green, sustainable and low-carbon economy is not just a technological process. It's also a process of far-reaching social change. To ensure a just transition, we need the active and close involvement of social dialogue and social partners, and I'm encouraged to see the work of the Global Deal and all its partners in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, and that concludes the first part of the introductory remarks, and we'll be moving on to the first panel. The first panel, which is Sustainable Business, Decent Work and Resilient Workplaces in Time of Transition. This will be a hybrid panel, so we will have 2 participants on stage and 2 participants joining us by video link. And this panel will look at the broader picture of social dialogue in times of transition. Transitions can be, as we know, short and temporary, like the pandemic, the current pandemic. At least we hope it's going to be temporary. Or it can be slower and more permanent as the transition to the green economy. This panel will discuss the pros and cons of using social dialogue as a tool to increase the resilience at the workplaces in times of transition. It will also discuss how you can use social dialogue in settings where it might not be one of the most usual tools. And I would like to start by introducing my very knowledgeable and experienced panel. First, we will present the panelists who will participate here. And let me invite Mrs. Rabia Faruqi, Division Director of Knowledge, Policy and Finance at the International Renewable Energy Agency. Welcome, Rabia. My other panelist, who is also going to be with us here physically, is Jean-Christophe Skiberas, who is the chair of the French Global Deal platform. Welcome, Jean-Christophe. And digitally, I hope, very welcome to Mr. Ambet Yuson, General Secretary of the Building and Woodworkers International, a global union federation that groups 351 trade unions that together hold 12 million members in 127 countries. And Mr. Victor van Vuren, who's joining us from the ILO, where he's Director of Enterprises Department. A warm welcome to you all. Now, let me kick this off at with a question to Vic, because the ILO core conventions, mainly freedom of association and the right to collective bargaining, they constitute the very core of the decent work agenda. But at the same time, we know that social dialogue is so much more than just the decent work agenda. And let me quote the ILO definition. It's all types of negotiation, consultation, or simply exchange of information between or among representatives of governments, employers, and workers on issues of common interest relating to economic and social policy. So, Vic, what does social dialogue bring to the table in a world where sometimes workers, employers, or even governments are not always organized in a way that will allow for collective bargaining?
I think one of the challenges that we face globally, I should say good morning or good afternoon, everyone. One of the challenges we face globally is that social dialogue is often equated to narrow collective bargaining on goods and services and wages and working conditions. Social dialogue is far broader than that. And what we need to recognize throughout the world is that process is as equally important as content. And we don't pay enough attention to institutionalizing the concept of social dialogue in our societies from a government, private sector, and societal level. And those countries that have managed to institutionalize the idea of social or the concept of social dialogue are those that are able to deal with these challenges, these global challenges, far easier than others. I just want to mention three brief examples. First of all, the apartheid system in South Africa. I come from South Africa and was in part of a process that was forced upon us. What got us through very challenging times to a democracy was social dialogue at all levels of society, from companies, big companies, small companies, from societies with government. The second one is the financial crisis that we went through. And we saw that the countries that emerged out of the global financial crisis first, with retention of jobs and quality of jobs, were those that had institutionalized social dialogue at the top levels and permeated it right down to the levels at grassroots. The third one that we're now embodied in is the COVID crisis. And here we are finding, once again, those countries that are able to move ahead and companies with a very good social dialogue pathway are able to come through the pandemic far better than others. Skills transfer, the dealing with digitization, the dealing with company closures and how one can build business resilience is all part of this. And now we come to the social dialogue that is needed for the future, building forward greener and better. And we've got these environmental challenges on top of the COVID challenge. Every time we look at the research, those countries and those regions that have embodied and embraced social dialogue come out far stronger than the others. My last point in these opening remarks is that we need to remember that the divide between the developed countries and the developing countries is increasing. And when we talk about just transition and a move towards digitalization, we need to recognize that this digital divide is getting bigger and bigger, and the skills gap is bigger and bigger. And the only way we can narrow that gap is to embody at a global and regional and country level the principles of social dialogue. So we can keep swapping best practices, we can encourage, we can negotiate deals of just transition rather than just saying, sorry, you lost. I can go on forever, I sound like a preacher, but these are my opening remarks as I'm very passionate about the importance of social dialogue, which underpins the very essence of what the ILO is about. Thank you.
Thank you, Vic. And moving from a multilateral to a national level, can I ask you, Jean-Christophe, how does the Global Deal Initiative in France provide a platform for French stakeholders who are active in a global context?
So can you hear me? It's good?
I think it's fine, maybe a little bit higher. Other side.
Like this?
Is that
It's better?
is that okay?
Okay.
Perfect.
First of all, thank you for this very nice invitation. I'm very happy to be here with you all. Thank you, Mrs. Albert, for leading this initiative, for representing the fact that Sweden was really in the initiative of the Global Deal. In France, we started when President Macron signed the Global Deal in Göteborg in 2017. So there was a very strong push from the government. And immediately afterwards, Mrs. Pénicaud, the then labor minister, organized a meeting with 14 big multinational companies. And with 5 out of the 6 main French union, plus OECD and ILO and Global Compact. And we started to very quickly to work together upon this brilliant initiative. I must say that, frankly, you should be very proud. We are here in the House of Sweden. You should be very proud as a country to have launched this global initiative. And this will be something that we will talk probably in the future. Why does it work between the businesses, the unions, and the government? How does it work? It works because we feel, I'm coming from the business, we feel that we are creating value. But you know, the business, they come and they work if they find value in the room, not in the theory. We need really. And so we worked on how can we exchange our best social practice, social dialogue practice all over the world. The company that belong to the Global Deal France now employ almost 3 million employees. Most of them are not in France. So the global company, we're not talking here on France, and we almost never talk about France in the Global Deal meeting of France. We're talking the way we behave everywhere in the world, in the developing country and new developing country. And then we have to learn all these difference in the world. And sometimes the company, they are just not understanding how it works all over the world. So the Global Deal, for us, it's a way to share our practice for a better understanding of how it's going in all the countries, what do we bring in this country, not only investment, but also transfer of skills, reducing poverty, bringing jobs and business. Although that what we have done for the last 20 years, which is sometimes we feel a little bit in danger, and then we have decided to share our practice to be stronger in social dialogue all over the world. And the second part, which has been very good in France, is when the government said, hey, guys, we need you to work on our international initiative. For instance, we had the G7 meetings in France in 2019, and Mrs. Pénicaud said, hey, you should work to provide me good ideas. I have 4 priorities for this G7 meeting. Gender equality all over the world. In your company, how do you behave? Bring me ideas, I would put that on the table. And this was very motivating for the business. I mean, to help the government to prepare a global event, to make this event a little bit more tangible, practical, which is, I think, important. And then we have been working more recently for the presidency of European Union. We will start 1st of January, and then the new labor minister, Mrs. Born, came to the meeting. She said, I have 4 topics I want to put on the table during the semester. And please, can you help me to work on that? On a very practical way, and we're talking about, and we made 4 working groups with the companies, the unions, providing idea, working together, and giving new ideas for, let's say, and one of the topic was social dialogue in the crisis. What has it changed in the social dialogue? What will be kept in the future? Because during the COVID crisis, social dialogue has increased. Clearly, there is a large consensus. How are we going to keep this momentum? This is one of the topics on the table, and we'll be meeting in Bordeaux February 15th with the ministers, and the Global Deal will participate to this discussion to bring what our experience, but also what we suggest to continue. Other topics are on the table also. But just to give you example, the way we interact between government, business, and the unions to make maybe the world better.
Thank you, Jean-Christophe. And you mentioned the COVID crisis. And can I ask you, Ambet, because of course the constructions sector is one where occupational health and safety is a great issue, because as a construction worker, you can, with difficulty, work from home. So COVID-19 has really impacted your sector and has been a priority for your trade union and other trade unions across the world. So can I ask you, what role has social dialogue played for you as a tool to mitigate those health risks to construction workers? And has it helped not only the workers, but maybe also their employers? Please, Ambet.
Thank you. Thank you for having me this. Well, I just want to comment on my colleague in the panel that maybe the unions and the employers having a good social dialogue will probably make a better world. No, I agree with that. No, so but I think health, very concretely, if we talk about social dialogue, health and safety is a good entry point. Health and safety is normally where employers and trade unions in the construction industry immediately agree. There's no debate. This is important. This is on top of the priority. And during the COVID crisis, the pandemic, we have realized the importance of health and safety. That's why I think this is now a campaign that health and safety be recognized as human rights, as fundamental rights in the ILO. So BWI actually have global agreements with big construction companies, like the Basics from Belgium. We have an agreement with the French Vinci and the Swedish Skanska. And this agreement, the commitment of social dialogue, not only just talking, but of course going to the field. No, we conduct health and safety inspections in the various construction sites from Australia to Europe, UAE and Qatar, to Africa and the Americas. We conduct this. So this is social dialogue in practice, because we find the solution on the site. No? So many of our trade unions during the pandemic have been tremendously impacted, no? But the construction industry, with its collaboration with the union, have introduced protocol, strengthened its health and safety protocol, more PPEs, negotiated night shift, while the project timeline may have been stretched, but work would have been consistent and relatively safe. But we should address some deficit that we have identified in this crisis, and not to wait for the next pandemic to make some changes. One of that is workers' participation in health and safety assessment and risk mitigation is vital for compliance. No? We should work now to establish workers' representation at the workplace level, like having workers' safety committees, no? Develop a culture of health and safety cooperation, not only at that top level, saying that there's a health and safety policies, but at the workplace level between the employer and the workers. So established social dialogue help to formulate policies, potentially at the national level, but also at the local level. So it's important to have representation, which is a core of the freedom of association of the ILO. So why do we need to focus on the migrants when we talk about health and safety? Migrants are often the most vulnerable. They have seen, we have seen that during the pandemic, they are housed in dormitories, which makes it difficult for health protocols and be followed and adhered to. Migrants are often unorganized and without representation. It is more important that migrants are involved in the health and safety protection, access to health care, and better working and living condition. We need to ensure that migrant workers are given the opportunity to engage at workplaces through safety committees, and their voices must be heard during at the national and global level. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambet. And then moving from the temporary transitions to what I call the slow and permanent transition towards the green economy. But Rabi, I'm sure that you would not agree with me that this is a slow transition as the renewable energy market is growing exponentially. I know that this year you do an annual review, and this year you did that in cooperation with the ILO, focusing on renewable energy and jobs. You were looking at, for example, domestic supply chains, but also how decent work fit in a just energy transition. So could you share with us how you worked with the ILO on this report and how social dialogue fits in?
Thank you very much. So for those who don't know, IRENA is an international organization with 166 member countries whose mandate is to promote renewable energy. So we work across the world, and we happen to have our headquarters in Abu Dhabi. So before talking about the publication that you just mentioned, let me tell you that we've been working on the energy transition and how to translate it into socioeconomic variables for the past 8-9 years. So in other words, we take technological avenues and translate into what it means for regions, global, region, and national level in terms of GDP, job creation, as well as welfare. We have an energy transition welfare index that looks at what happens in society thanks to the energy transition. We've been working on that for many years, but at the same time, we have been also tracking the number of jobs in renewables since 2013. The last publication, we indeed did it with the ILO, and we're very happy about this cooperation. And we found that there are 12 million jobs in renewable energy, which is certainly an underestimate because we don't have all countries and all communities in this estimation. So what we also did in order to look at the transition to energy transition to 2015 and see what will happen to different countries, regions, and globally, we also have looked a few years ago at leveraging local capabilities through the renewable energy supply chains. We did that to see along the segments of the value chain, what kind of jobs do you need and how many do you need for a certain capacity. And that has helped us actually provide the estimates that we give for 2030 and 2050 in terms of the job requirements in energy efficiency, in renewables, energy flexibility, etc. This is where we see that jobs in fossil fuels will decrease and compensated, of course, by the jobs in what we call energy transition-related jobs, but which means that we need to absolutely address the job losses that will happen. This is why we have a whole set of activities around skills, reskilling, training, etc., for which the ILO, of course, is definitely the expert. What I'd like to highlight, though, of course, I think we all agree that social dialogue is very important, etc. But before having decent jobs and before social dialogue, which doesn't exist in many countries where a lot of resources are taken from, we need jobs. And those jobs, for the moment, according to everything that we've looked at in terms of what I just mentioned, those jobs are not necessarily created in the developing countries. And in order to do that, this is ultimately intimately related to value chain, to industrial policies. And we discovered suddenly during COVID that globalized supply chains can be a problem, and that not having local value chain is a big problem. Well, this is the reality of most developing countries, because we take raw materials from developing countries, and developing countries have not been able, over the past many decades, to develop along the supply chain, build them, strengthen them, lengthen them, because they're commodity dependent, they're technology dependent, etc. So I'm really happy to tell you that we are at the General Assembly of IRENA. We have a ministerial on Africa where we are publishing a report on Africa and the different mainly five regions of Africa, showing what happens to the regions as a result of the energy transition, given planned scenarios that the countries have, and giving a 1.5 compatible scenario, and what is required really in terms of industrial policy, labor market policy, social protection policy, etc., in order for Africa and its regions to benefit from this energy transition from a socioeconomic point of view. And that requires not only the policies that I think we all agree on in terms of labor markets, etc., and industrial policy, but also requires transfer of funds from the global north to the global south, south-south cooperation, and reducing some of the dependencies that developing countries have suffered from and have hampered their development.
Thank you, Rabia. And can I ask Vic, because I know that this week the ILO and IRENA are doing a joint event here at Expo on energy and jobs to power the future. So could you tell us a little bit more about the ILO cooperation with IRENA on this issue and how social dialogue fits into that?
Yes, I think the whole deal that we've done with IRENA has been advantageous for both parties. We drive the Just Transition Guidelines, which we promoted at the COP26 meeting. But what we need to recognize is that, as Rabia has pointed out, the complexities of this, that when we're talking of the developing economies, we're going to have a difficult task, because it's no good just proposing to move to renewable energy and you're losing certain existing jobs. What do? It's not so easy to just go and upgrade skills and say, all right, we've done our deal, people can now look for other jobs in the market. It's very difficult. And so what we have to have is that process in place that shows governments how to move from A to B. And that just transition process is so important. And underlying all of that is social dialogue, because you have to engage with those workers and the companies where there's going to be a change. We have to identify where the new jobs are going to be. And all the assumptions that we've made is that there's going to be this huge potential of new jobs, but we don't quite know what those jobs are going to be. We have to specify what skills are going to be required, and we have to work with governments to change their whole education policy. We have to look at companies about how they're going to reskill workers that may become redundant because of a change of tack. So it's a very complex process that needs to be have an engagement from national level, sectoral level, right down to grassroots. And that is where social dialogue and what we believe from the ILO's expertise we can offer in this process. These Just Transition Guidelines that I refer to were guidelines negotiated a number of years ago in a tripartite fashion between the workers, the employers, and governments. And so we have got these agreed principles that can be used, because we need to ensure that there's a decent work agenda, that new jobs created are decent jobs, that the people who are losing jobs are able to be picked up by a social security network in the absence of there being available jobs. And we haven't even touched on the whole area of social security, which is lacking in developing economies. So this partnership with Arena is very timeless because the whole environmental debate is the future, and we need to look at how we can walk this path together and guide governments and social partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Vic. And then maybe I could turn to you, Ambit, because you were talking about how COVID affected and how you work with social dialogue in the short-term transformation of COVID. Do you see that those measures or what the work that you are doing there could be used in order to meet the challenges of the green transition or the slower transition?
Yes, definitely. So yeah, for us, the green economy transformation to green economy means green jobs and decent jobs. No, but we need a just transition. But I agree with Vic. No, social dialogue is crucial in when you talk about just transition. There can be no just transition without social dialogue because in the social dialogue we involve all the parties together. And for BWI, social dialogue is bringing in those who are powerless, those who do not have the means, the underrepresented. So that would facilitate that dialogue and see proactively how we can have a better and just and decent transition. Now, let me give you an example because we have really a good initiative. Breaking it down to a more concrete action again, no? BWI have joined forces with C40 cities. The C40s is to promote a greater alliance between trade unions and mayors to facilitate transition to a cleaner construction sector. And I'm happy to say that Dubai is one of the C40 cities that are part of this cooperation. So here we hope that we can develop a cooperation with Dubai towards a cleaner and safer cities in the construction sector. When we say cleaner and safer, it means greener, it means decent jobs. So involving all, our shared vision with C40 is for a regenerative, resilient, inclusive, and just construction sector where no one is left behind, that everyone can thrive, including those who are affected by the transition towards net zero. The marginalized sectors, the women, people of color, indigenous groups, and migrant workers. So we believe together we are calling for a transition that addresses job losses and provide all workers with a good quality jobs and create a thriving and equitable communities for everyone. Now, let me also raise one more point that with the climate change, we expect there's increasing migration of people. With the crisis, we have seen not decreasing but increasing movement of migrant workers. So migrant workers should be part of the discussion. And BWI believes that we need to start seriously, have a discussion and a social dialogue, not with organization, but have a legitimate representative from the migrants and the trade unions so that they are part of the solution. They are part of the just transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambit. And then could I ask you, Jean-Christophe, because you're the chair of the French Global Deal Platform, but how do you've listened to all these experiences that are being shared now. How do you see that the International Global Deal Platform can be used to share these kinds of experiences worldwide?
Well, first of all, I've been very happy to listen to all this experience of discussion between, let's say, unions, workers' organization, and the organization like NGO that you represent very well, Rabia. Congratulations.
We're not an NGO.
You're not an NGO, but you have a message, a strong message. Like I felt a very strong and sincere message. And the question for us is how do we combine? Where are the places where we work together? Because the natural tendency is to work in his line, in his silo. And where do we work together to balance the interest? I want to be very clear here. We've seen in the ESG, we have seen the E growing, but the S is not as big. So how do we balance the E and the S? And we need to find places. And this is not only an image, it's very practical. I take an example, and it's very interesting. Transition of the workers. We have huge challenge in automotive industry. The objective for Europe are just incredible. Today, some people, they don't have jobs anymore. It's not only 2035, it's today. The people working on engineering or powertrain, they don't have job anymore because nobody is starting to build new powertrain. So what do we do with our people? We could say, hey, transition, let's go to work to the building industry because we all know that we have huge needs of manpower in the building industry because thanks to the green transition. But the question is, how do you transfer the people from automotive industry to building industry? And that's the key issue. So, and where is a place to balance the rhythm of the people to reskill, to be prepared, to bargain? It takes time. It takes time. And today, I'm not totally sure that the speed is going at the right way on both lanes, you see. So we need to better work together. I'm very happy about the agreement you made with ILO because it's a good example. ILO is more on the worker side. You are more representing the environment issues, and I'm very happy to see that you have this kind of places. But when it goes to the business, when you are in the business in the company, let's talk about the practical life of the people. It's not really easy to make this happen. When you go to see, maybe Christian will talk about that. When you discuss with the unions in the automotive company, you say, hey guys, good news, we have a lot of jobs in the building industry. I mean, you cannot talk like this. It doesn't work like this. We have a lot of jobs also for the healthcare because of the demographic transition, more. But if you say to the people, you're going to work with old people coming from automotive industry, so it's really difficult. We must take it very seriously. To answer to your question, great question, I think Global Deal is really a good place if we have a room where we work together. And I think Global Deal is a room. We have created rooms. And when you have rooms, it changes things. People are there. Even if it's difficult, they can feel obliged to find a solution. The problem is when people are not in the same rooms. So Global Deal is a room. Thanks.
I think that was an excellent last intervention of this panel because now we've run out of time. But I will welcome you back to this room and panel 2 at 1:15. And now, please, there's coffee served in the back. And I invite you back here in your chairs at 1:15 for panel 2, where we will look at practical examples of social dialogue. Thank you. And thank you to all panelists who joined us today. Thank you. I'm happy that we still have a full room, and I think it's going to be well worth it. We have a very exciting panel that will focus more on the practical examples. It's called Exchange of Good Practices of Social Dialogue in Times of Transition. And this panel will also be in a hybrid format. So let me introduce our distinguished panelists. First, we start with those who are here with us physically today. And it's my pleasure to invite Christian Levin, CEO and President of Scania, onto the stage. Welcome, Christian.
Can I choose?
Yeah, pick. And I'm also very happy to give a warm welcome again to Jean-Christophe Guibert, Chair of the French Global Deal Platform. And with us on video link, we have, and I'm happy to welcome Marjorie Alexandre from Force Ouvrier, the third largest union in France, and Johan Järvklo from the Swedish trade metals union IF Metall. Very welcome to you both. In this panel, we will focus on the practical examples of social dialogue. And as we know, social dialogue can take many shapes and forms, and there's no one-size-fits-all. So our distinguished panelists today will discuss how they use social dialogue in their organization and how that benefits them. And let me kick this off with a question to you, Marjorie, because I think it's interesting. In France, the labor market is not known for dialogue, or rather to be rather confrontational. And I realize I'm still sitting with my face mask on and it's getting stuck. So I hope you can still hear me. So Marjorie, I will ask you the question and then I will try to extricate myself from my face mask. In the French labor market, which is deemed to be a bit more confrontational than based on dialogue, how do you see that the Global Deal Initiative has influenced that, and has it helped to create more dialogue in the French national context? Over to you, Marjorie.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for your question. It's a question we often have as French trade unions, but I would rather say, because we are often shown as confrontational, but if confrontational refers to the French history, then we can easily understand where it comes from. But if it refers to now and to trade unions, then it seems a quite strong word. The last wave of strikes and reforms in a united way between trade unions goes back to 2019, when trade unions mobilized against an unfair reform, which was the one on pensions, at the core of our social protection model. So the question is defending our social protection model, which is given as an example all over the world, confrontational? So I don't think so. So the second part of your question was that apparently you tend to think that social dialogue is not the first thing in France, but I cannot let people think this, because social dialogue is always from the trade union's point of view in France, the first thing to do. First, we talk and use all the means at our disposal to maintain and get the rights. And confrontation, going to the streets, is only in the case that our claims are not heard. So first we talk, and maybe after using all the means at our disposal, then this is time for mobilization. So the question is, on the French trade union's point of view, is social dialogue fully applied and respected from all parties in France? Because if social dialogue is only reduced to a mere consultation, then for us it's not social dialogue. Learning from the press new elements of reform is not social dialogue. But since it was created, my union, Force Ouvrière, has deeply promoted in real and concrete social dialogue as defined in the ILO conventions. And that's what social dialogue means to us. So in this regard, Taking part to the global deal is seen by FO as a means, among others, to send messages to the representatives of the government and to the representatives of the enterprises. It's another level of dialogue, and we are trying to use all the ways that are at our disposal to push forward new rights and to maintain rights and to send messages to all parties that we think is needed to send messages.
Thank you, Marjorie. And can I move on to a very, very practical example and ask you, Christian? Because Scania is a partner in what's called the Swedish Workplace Program that you have in cooperation with IF Metall, which Johan represents, and the International Council of Swedish Industries, who I know are also present here with us today. I know there was a workshop on this or an event on this in last Friday in this very same room. And the Swedish Workplace Program is designed to support social dialogue in Scania's workplaces by constituting workplace committees, for example. How do you see that social dialogue adds, and why is Scania engaged in this program?
Good question. I think it's easy to think that Scania is a very Swedish company and we operate out of Södertälje, but that's just a very small part of our global activity. We are in 110 countries, and many who do not, where the tradition of working close and having trust between management and the workers' representatives, if there are representatives, is not there. And therefore, this has been a great platform to kind of spread our way of collaborating and creating the trust that is necessary to get involved early and to actually together decide on what needs to be done. And if you ask for practical examples, one was in the sub-Saharan region, where we set up committees to tackle the HIV epidemic together, which created huge unrest in all of our business units down there. So I think that is a good one to highlight. But I think also, if I take, I mean, I'm also now very much involved into the Triton Group and going down to southern parts, or not southern part, but down to Germany, and there's a completely different tradition, and it's so difficult to create this trust where you actually agree that you are in the same boat and what is good for the company will be good for the employees, is good for the employees. It's so hard to create it if the whole tradition is based on confrontation and distrust. So it's very easy to say, and I think this is a very good tool that we have developed in the SWC to come to that level of trust.
Thank you. And then can I ask you, Johan, because you're also engaged in the Swedish Workplace Program, what lessons learned do you have from the development of that program?
Well, I would say that the Swedish Workplace Program is mainly a training facility in social dialogue and in building these relations between, and also trust, as mentioned, between the parties. And of course, in the end, we want the parties to be able to write collective bargaining agreements, because that's what the parties on the workplace are really about, setting the price and the conditions for work. And we need to do that in a controlled manner.
Thank you, Johan. Can I continue with a little bit of a different questions? Because Swedish trade unions have a long tradition of carrying out dialogue with employers and governments in the national context. What lessons can be learned in that national context, and can those lessons be used in a global context, where we know that sometimes in the former panel we were discussing renewable energy, and you can see that sometimes the short-term perspective of preserving jobs can be juxtaposed to the transformation towards a green society. So how do you see the possibility of using what you learn in a national context and applying it in an international context?
Well, for starters, I think those short-term and long-term perspectives, they don't compete at all. And in these changing times, I think we will talk about them a little bit more. I think any progressive union, need to take an interest in the long-term perspective. and sit down with the company. And that at least is what I try to tell the companies in Sweden. You need to sit down with the company and the management and talk about the long-term perspective. What do they see in the business model for the future, maybe 10, 15 years ahead of time? What kind of investments do we need to actually keep the work for the workers in Sweden or all in the company as a large? And of course, what kind of competence will we need in the future? And what kind of reskilling and upskilling will there be? Maybe you also need to write a collective bargaining agreement about that. I know they did that in Germany in the Volkswagen Group, that they made one roadmap, digitalization, they called it. And also here, I think we maybe need the tripartite discussions also with the governments, of course, seeing what kind of help we can get from the governments when it comes to investment and well, support. When it comes, of course, to the global scale, I think all multinationals need to think on a global scale. I think the auto industry, as represented here in the panel, of course, you have lots of suppliers and you have lots of also different markets. I don't know if anyone would say anything about that, but the digital or the electrical transformation will not happen overnight on a global scale. So of course, you have to have products that are on the market for all different markets, because there will be different markets and different times of the market as well for this change. So you need to have the global mindset all the time.
Thank you, Johan. And can I just then tag on to that, Christian? We were talking about short-term and long-term. So when you engage in a program such as the Swedish Workplace Program, what is your time frame and when do you expect to see results? And are there any results that you could share already?
Johan is absolutely right. I mean, one principle is early involvement, and the other principle is from high to low. So from the strategic level all the way down to the very practical operational level, we need to work together. We have talked a lot about digitalization and about electrification and the mega trends that change our industry. But if I should take something very practical, we are investing in a new foundry, old-fashioned style. You need that actually for also electric drive lines, a lot of forged components. And by doing that, of course, we increase the level of automation in the plant a lot. We also go all in for sustainability, so we're going to actually get 3 times more output with half the energy used. So it's also a sustainability investment. But the point is that, of course, it's a completely new work environment and new skills needed for all the people who worked in our old foundry. And some of our colleagues there, they spent 40, 45 years in the very same workplace. And it's a very manual and very heavy workplace. And suddenly you go into operating robots and assembly lines where you need to be skilled in computers. And that has been a long journey, starting with the planning of that plant, making sure that everyone who wants to be part of an upskill or reskill get the adequate training. And that is mainly done in-house, but we also have a good collaboration with the Royal Technical High School in Stockholm, KTH, for lifelong learning, where we do them programs. And then, of course, there are always some people who say, no, that's not for me. It's just too difficult or too scary, and I went into a change is also creating, I think, in all of us humans, an element of fear. And hence you say, no, thank you. And then we have to find, of course, also for these colleagues, a fair solution. Either in another way or finding a way then to actually change career and maybe not work in our company anymore. But that has been a plan that we drew up, I think, 7 years ago. And we are this year starting up the production and going full scale next year. So it's an 8-year project, you can say. Just to take a home-made small example, but it's big change for a lot of people.
Thank you, Christian. And then, Jean-Christophe, can I ask you, because during COVID, there's been a lot of reports on supply chain disruptions, the difficulty of making sure that occupational health and safety is guaranteed within supply chains or production sites that are in other countries. And how do you see that French stakeholders have used the French Global Deal platform? Has that been an instrument in order to mitigate those risks in the global supply chains?
Yes, during the COVID crisis, the meeting continued in the Global Deal French platform because we have a monthly meeting, plenary session, and working groups. And we decided to share our experience in a very important plenary session we had in May 2020 to share our experience, the way we have managed, not only in France but globally, because as I said, all that are global companies, and the way we have been. So we have done, as I've explained the previous panel, exchange our best practice on any kind, testing, temperature. What do we do with vaccine? No jab, no job. What do we do? And of course, what was quite important is to share globally. And you know, in this, what we had, of course, both local regulations, and we have to comply in every country with local regulation. But at the same time, I must say, we had a strong ASEAN influence, because since the COVID started there, we had all our operation in Asia deciding, and this had a lot of influence because we had about in Europe 2 or 3 months of delay. And so I think to be practical, we have implemented a lot of Chinese decision in some way in Europe. It was a very global crisis, and also in terms of solution, we have been very kind of global, of course complying with local decision, but it's a mix between the globalization and local decision. To come to your point about the supply chain, of course, it depends a lot of the company, because to be very honest, it's very it's a huge challenge, a new challenge, a necessary challenge, but a very ambitious challenge to take care not only of on your people, but also the people of your suppliers. Of course, we have a growing trend towards taking care of your suppliers. And what it means taking care of the suppliers, it usually the big company, for instance, like Scania or the globally company, we are usually bigger than our suppliers. So the suppliers, how can we help them? Because we have more means, we have more people, we have sometimes more skills. So the first thing to help suppliers is, this is a kind of solution we just sharing experiences very quickly, and this is the way we have been working. It's also kind of dissemination of our best practice to our suppliers.
Thank you, Jean-Christophe. And Marjorie, could I turn to you, because we've been talking about transformations, the green transformation, the COVID transformation, but we also have a kind of a transformation of the labor market, where we have new settings coming in, such as the gig economy, lots of outsourcing. And how do you see that the transformation of the labor market, which may impact, for example, trade union membership, how do you see that social dialogue could be ensured in the future if we do have a very much more diverse labor market?
This is the quite complex question, because the transformations going on in the gig economy are going on right now, and this is a big discussion at the international level. It is big discussion at the ILO, it is big discussion at the European level, at the international level, in the national context, in many decisions from justice. And this question is, first of all, a question of the status of the people employed in the gig economy, which is not, this question has not found a solution right now. So some are pushing for a deregulated market, a deregulated gig economy, and some are pushing for only having employed workers. Our position at Force Ouvrière is to give the choice to the employed workers of the gig economy between a status of employed worker or real independent worker. And then when this question is set, we can talk about collective representation of these workers. So why would we need different form of representation of these workers? Why couldn't they be part of trade unions as they exist? For Force Ouvrière, it's fully possible if the choice is given to these workers to be either employed workers and so the gig economy enterprises and platforms recognized as enterprises, or to give them the choice of being really independent, which is not the case at the moment. So of course this is a quite changing context, but it would be quite dangerous to try by this way of not recognizes a clear status to these workers. It would be quite dangerous to dismantle the way trade unions are organized right now, because they are part of the solution. Trade unions are part of the solution, and they are organized democratically, and they are part of a democratic system. So we strongly advocate for these workers to be considered as either employed or fully, really independent, and then they can be represented by trade unions as they exist, because we have inside our trade unions, we know how to push for the rights of these people. In France, there is at the moment a discussion about the collective representation of these workers. And you know that in France, there was a law passed in 2008 about trade union representativity. So advocating right now for collective associations of gig workers to negotiate is making me ask this question: is what would be the rights of this collective association, since they are not regulated by the 2008 law, for example? So I think the question of representing the trade union workers, representing the workers from this gig economy is first set the question of their status.
Thank you, Marjorie. And can I ask you, Johan, because you, as in your trade union, you're working a lot with strengthening the social dialogue in supply chains abroad in collaboration with Swedish companies. But what is your incentive of doing that, working with the supply chains abroad and social dialogue, and not so much and not prioritizing the national level?
Well, I would say we do prioritize also the national level, of course. I mean, that is one of our main objectives, of course. But I think history have taught us that Sweden is a very small country. We cannot have every work in the world inside our own borders, not even the ones for Scania, for instance, which is a very large company in Sweden. I think would I be fair to say, Christian, that over 90% of what we produce goes on export? So of course, there's no point in having everything in Sweden. But of course, our work then with strengthening the social dialogue outside of Sweden is, of course, well, one part is solidarity, of course. We want to try to stop social dumping and make sure that working conditions in the Swedish multinationals are decent, or they should be okay. And that also goes hand in hand with our expectations on Swedish companies in how they should work with the OECD guidelines and human rights and labor rights, of course. And of course, the third aspect is what I started with, and I think history has taught us in Sweden that I mean, we are a high labor cost country. I mean, there's no way of getting around that, and of course, that also comes with constant restructuring, and some jobs, they are no longer profitable in a high cost country, so they need to move out, and then we try to find new work, and of course the technical development is constantly pushing our or breaking new ground. So we want to be on that edge. At the same time, then of course keeping the other ones both in supply chains, but also in companies like Scania, in the entire organization to keep them being on a good and decent level.
Thank you, Johan. And then can I turn to you, Christian, because the fact that in order to get a sustainable business mainstreamed in an organization, it's extremely important to have the buy-in from the top level. And you being here is such an example, a CEO talking about social dialogue. So do you have any good concrete examples to share with us how you make this work in Scania?
Yeah, good question. Of course, we focus and we talk a lot externally about our sustainability journey, but that tends to be CO2 or alternative fuels. And what we talk about here is, of course, broadening that concept and making sure that everyone is on board and everyone is prepared for this transition. But we have talked a lot about COVID, and one of the problems for us in our industry has been the semiconductors. And suddenly we were out of supply, which hurt us tremendously. And the problem is, of course, you don't know when you get supply. And engaging in the social dialogue on actually the lowest possible level, the best solutions are coming up. And I think that's something to really send to the rest of the world not working this way, that just because you work in top management and you're skilled in strategy does not mean that you are able to pick up the best solutions to a problem. So what we do is we engage actually the whole company in problem solving in a way. And that's why we, for instance, then together agreed that we closed down the plants a week earlier ahead of the summer vacations to rebuild the buffers and then also start a week earlier. I think that from the company side it would have been very difficult to even think of or propose. But that was coming in a great bottom-up dialogue. So very practical and concrete example. But there are many where you see the best solution is coming from the people who do the job, because then they know exactly what is happening there. And I think that goes through our entire way of thinking with the Scania way and all the local improvement work that we do everywhere where you are in the company. You're part of improving the daily work. And hence also you are then skilled. Even if you don't think so, you are actually skilled in engaging in more strategic or long-term dialogues as well.
Thank you. Can I then move to you, Jean-Christophe, because I know that the French Global Deal Platform, you're working on the development of a self-evaluation tool where companies can assess the level of social dialogue in their global engagement. So could you give us some examples and introduce the work that you're doing that in that context?
Yes, thank you. It's true that we work on building an index to measure the quality of social dialogue at a global level by global company through a self-assessment system involving employees' representatives. Why do we do that? Because first, in discussion, everybody says social dialogue is very good in my company, but in fact it's difficult to compare. So we need really to benchmark, and building a common index would be a tool for that. Then we all know when we work that we cannot improve without objectives. So we want to have to give the possibility we are at such level, then we can target this one, and where are the areas where we should improve compared to the others. So it's a tool. It's in a way like a tool of management, in fact. Why we are working on that? It's because we more and more in the global context, many people they evaluate you, external financial agencies, government, And every day you have a new index, new ideas. And in the global deal, you say, yeah, but why don't we try to build an index ourselves? The business with the unions and the government. It's our role. Because probably it would be more appropriate, because, to be frank, we have some concern sometimes about the black box of some evaluation provided by external agencies, for instance. So we take the responsibility to build something because we practice ourselves the social dialogue. We know how it works because we do that. We don't say we are perfect, of course, but this is really to improve. So to be practical, we have defined 9 indicators, and then there will be different levels. And I can give you some example of the indicators. So first, is there any kind of employees relation guidelines in the company? Yes, no. Is it discussed at the top level of the company, or is it HR? You can immediately feel that when it's at the top of the agenda, then you get a better grades. Second question, do you discuss with your employees? I'm not talking about union there. The direct communication, do you listen to them? Bottom-up solution or top-down solution? Then you have a different grading. Then places to discuss. Do you have places to discuss? Committees, works council, union discussion. Is it only local, or do you have also a global level of discussion? Then you can feel that the more places of discussion you have, the better grade you will get. Of course, when you have a global level of discussion to talk about strategy with the top management, you get a better grade. And so on. So at the board level, the governance, do you have employee representative in the board? Yes or no? How many? And do they have a status that allows them to continue to be in close connection with the employees? Not only the employees of the country, but all the employees of the company. So you can feel then, when you have a good they have means to do their job as board members with a good connection to the employee, you have a better grade. Then you ask to the employee representative, what do you think about the evaluation made by the management? Because the tool is a tool for the business. That's the responsibility of the business to manage. But to improve the honesty of the evaluation, we feel that it's good to have employee representative vision. And if they agree, you have a kind of bonus. And if they don't agree with the self-assessment of the management, you have a malus. It doesn't mean you don't have a grade, but it's not as good as if you agree with your employee representative. So at the end of the day, you will have a grade. In the first phase, it will be an experimental phase. Probably will not publish immediately. We'll see that later when we will stabilize the thing. Today, I must say that we are experimenting this with a few global companies of various countries to see how does it fit? What kind of grades do you make a kind of rough evaluation just to be sure? And so far, it's quite okay. And this is not today a global deal French platform initiative. We have brought this topic to the global deal unit at the OECD. And the first presentation of the project will be made at the next TIRCO. Mrs. Alberg is the president of this TIRCO. So early in January, I will do a presentation. I must say that the global deal TIRCO said us, okay, work on that. We have created a task force with ILO experts, OECD experts, union experts, business experts. So there will be a milestone important in January. My dream, but I am very convinced about this project, it would be to get a kind of approval of the global deal unit and OECD and ILO in May. And then maybe when there will be a revision of the OECD guidelines of multinational, we could plug this tool to the OECD multinational guidelines. And so it will give more exposure. Of course, it will be voluntary use by the business, but we are ambitious. We want to have a tool that is useful, that is made to make some progress. And frankly, on this topic, we think the social dialogue progress has a lot of influence on the business progress. This is totally linked.
Thank you, Jean-Christophe. That is very interesting. And mind you, you are getting a preview now. This is not even released yet. It will come on the 10th of January. You heard it first here. And we're closing up on this panel, but I would be very interested to get a reaction from our other panelists on the proposal coming from the Global Deal on social dialogue indicators. Do you think that is this something going to work? Is this something that you would engage with? And I'll start with you, Marjorie. What do you think about social dialogue indicators?
I think the Global Deal is an instance in which, as Jean-Christophe said, there is an exchange of good practices. So why not have internal indicators of social dialogue created and reviewed by the Global Deal? Why not? Then I wouldn't see what could prevent us from taking part to the plenaries dealing with this question. It could be a good assessment of social dialogue in France, for example.
Thank you, Marjorie.
And if I may, if we are now arriving to the conclusion of the meeting, I heard so the manager from Scania said something earlier, and I think this would be a good conclusion to the meeting. When he said that what is good for the company is good for the workers, and I would say vice versa. What is good for the workers is also good for the company, and that's how to build a sustainable business environment.
Thank you, Marjorie.
And I fully agree.
Perfect. Thank you. Johan, your comment on social dialogue indicators.
I think it's a really good idea, and I think when Jean-Christophe talks about the bonus-malus system, that this is not only made by the company unilaterally, that kind of creates also an incentive for creating and working on social dialogue. In the end, I think, of course, a goal would be to have social dialogue, a fruitful and honest social dialogue, and good relations between the parties in the workplace. And if these indicators can be a part of that, that's a good step forward.
Thank you, Johan. And then, Christian, you get the last word, apart from myself on this
that
panel.
Topic, I think, yeah, but we have the ESG and we need to follow it up in some way. And the social is the most difficult to measure and follow up. And I liked your proposed method. And I agree with you, Johan. I mean, there should really be this checkpoint that this is not just a top-down, but also bottom-up, acknowledged with a plus or a minus. I mean, the only thing that speaks against is that we are drowning in measurement systems as companies today. We're supposed to measure everything backwards, forwards, and it becomes a truth that sometimes is not representative and is awkward. So we need to be careful that it becomes not just another one of these tools, but really can be something on a large scale that can be used by many. And the way you describe it, I think it has that potential.
Well, with that, I think we should say thank you to panel 2 with a big applause. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The last part, which is the wrap-up, and I will be brief and not keep you too long from your lunch, which will be served in the lobby. So today we've heard from a range of prominent speakers on their reviews on social dialogue as a tool in times of transitions to the green economy. And I think that we have a couple of takeaways. The first one is that there is an agreement on the usefulness of social dialogue as a tool to handle the transition, and that it's also important to have the buy-in and the acceptance of lots of different stakeholders. And we've seen that, and today on the scene, we've had representation from all kinds of different stakeholders talking about social dialogue. Another takeaway from this is that social dialogue is adaptable, and it can be used in many different contexts and in many different ways. There is no one-size-fits-all solution, and social dialogue in Sweden does not have to be the same thing as the social dialogue in Dubai, or Finland, or the United States, or France, or Belgium. It's adaptable depending on the situation and the context. And lastly, that the ILO conventions are still the core that we're working after, but that social dialogue can have a different shape or form depending on the labor market stakeholders in the different markets. So thank you so much for joining us here today. A big thank you to all of our panelists and speakers. I hope you enjoyed these 2 hours. And now lunch will be served in the lobby, networking luncheon. And if anyone has any further interest in the global deal, we do have a couple of experts here. We have Jean-Christophe from the French platform, but we also have Oscar Berger, who is the Swedish coordinator for the Global Deal platform. And if you have any interest in that, then please find them at the networking luncheon. Thank you so much.